Well, hello everyone, and greetings from Lima, Peru. Hannah and I had the great pleasure of spending time with our dear friends Anna and Mark Burgess, who have been missionaries here in Peru for about 12, 13 years, along with their three sons. And they've been ministering primarily in Lima, the capital city, and also they do a lot of work in the jungle with Amazon rainforest tribes. So Mark, can you just give us a quick overview of what that ministry looks like?
Absolutely, yes. We actually work with two indigenous tribes in the jungle. A tribe called the Aguahun, who are a small family that live about 50 miles out of the main city, Pucallpa, where we minister. Pucallpa means coloured earth. And we've been able to help them. We've been able to eat things like wild boar with them. I've eaten tortoise. I know that sounds wrong. And we've had some really good times evangelizing them, working with the extended family, because they're basically a mum and a dad had four children. They've married and they've had children. I think there may even be a fourth generation in that village, so we work with them. But we all mainly work with the Shabibo people. And the Shabibo, they speak Shabibo, same as the Aguahun speak Aguahun. And the Shabibo, we have four families who are all connected here in Lima. Two of the families especially came here for 4 and 6 years to train with us in our School of Ministry. And they're now planting churches in the jungle. They're reaching out, making disciples there as well. And doing all the same sort of things that we do here in Lima, and I know Alex and Hannah do in the US, making disciples, but in obviously a very different way. So yes, that's what we do in the jungle, more or less.
Fantastic. So our theme today is how to think and how to operate like a missionary. And it's on the basis that every one of us is called to be a missionary, whether you've travelled across the globe like you have, or whether you have to just travel across the street. But we want to learn from you two, because you've had to work out as outsiders coming into a new culture, how to understand it, how to minister here, successes and failures along the way, and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. So that's what we want to learn from. So Hannah, you've got our first question.
So thinking about your initial call and how you were, what did it look like? How did you know that you were to come here to Peru?
Okay, so it was a journey. It wasn't something that was clear or straight away, but from a very young age I had a desire to be a missionary. I heard missionary stories, and God put something in my heart. I remember being at a conference, and the speaker saying, "Is there anyone here who feels that they would like to be a missionary? I'd like you to come forward, and would like to pray with you." And that was something that even for a very young age, I would have probably been, I don't know, somewhere between 7 and 10. Mm-hmm. That was something that spoke to me. So I always felt that I wanted to be a missionary, but what that looked like, I originally thought that would be going to Africa. But the languages that I knew French. French was what I was studying at school. At university, I went on to study Spanish, and I deliberately chose languages in order to be part of that missionary calling. And as part of my year abroad at university, we deliberately chose, I was already married to Mark by then, we deliberately chose to come to Peru to test a calling. We felt that God, the idea of Peru was more spontaneous. We were looking through a magazine of different countries with Latin Link, with the missionary sending organisation that did short-term missions. And as I was going through, Peru stood out to us. And they asked us, is there a particular country you feel you might like to go to? And we said, you can send us anywhere that there's an appropriate project, but I don't know why we feel that probably Peru. Mm-hmm. And they said, we probably won't send you to Peru, but they found the perfect project for us in Peru. So we came in, did 7 months here, and from the first day we're here, we just felt like, yes, this was the place we were meant to be. We enjoyed learning from the people, learning about the culture, and we felt that confirmed the idea that we had in our head.
Absolutely, and I think while we were here for 7 months in 2005, I always say to people, we had good days, we had bad days, we had amazing days, and we had terrible days. So it wasn't like when we felt God's call to come back 2 to 3 years later, it wasn't like we were like thinking everything was rosy, it was going to be amazing. We'd had what we thought were fairly bad days as well, so we knew it wasn't going to be just really easy. Even though my journey to get to that point was a little bit different, but silly little things, even like when I was in middle school, I did a project on Ecuador, of all the countries in the world to do a project on, and it really impacted me, and I really enjoyed studying. So again, just the little things I think as well in my journey. Also, I've always felt the calling to be a leader, and again, I didn't really know what that meant, and I tried out several things while I was still back in the UK trying to lead, but it wasn't right. God's timing, it wasn't the right role. I was even disappointed when I didn't get certain roles in the church we were in back in the UK. But again, that was just me trying to do it in my own strength rather than actually waiting for God to call me. And it was obvious that my call was to Peru, and that was confirmed in 2005. And then also, as we worked through, being in seminary as well, just helped me focus of where God was calling me. And I think the final thing to say on this as well is I remember there was a sermon in our church back in Sheffield in the UK, and I remember the leader talking about we're called to the city. What are you called to do in the city? And I felt clearly God say to me, you're not called to the city. And I felt really annoyed by that because everyone's getting so excited about this vision, but I knew it wasn't what I was called to do.
So you moved here in, was it 2007, 2008?
Yep.
Okay, and you've had...
Yeah, we came with our eldest child, who was 9 months old at the time, and then had 2 more boys here in Peru.
So there you go, 2 mothers of 3 boys, so a special place in heaven for you two. So once you were here permanently, just talk a bit about, you have to find your feet and stuff, but how did you start ministering in this community once you felt, this was the place you were meant to be living?
So while we were here in 2007, we actually met a couple who became really good friends of ours, and we're still good friends with them now. And I think we went to spend time with them, and first of all, we very much want to find people that people of peace, people where we can work with them. And immediately we started working with them and spending time with them. But actually it didn't really work out because at that time they had a fairly small church, and they had lots of leaders, and we felt a bit superfluous. I can't even say that word. I struggle with Spanish and English. After realising that wasn't the right call, we went to move to another church, which seemed like a really good fit. We were able to do some mission there. We were able to. We actually started doing the work in Pacifica in the shantytown, and another video that we've done with Alex and Hannah talks a little bit about our work in Pacifica shantytown, and we actually did a Christmas event for 600 plus kids, but we felt really strongly that it wasn't just an event, because as we can all do events, but actually real missionary work, and when I talk about missionary work I don't mean just here overseas, but real mission work for me is the process, is doing the day in, the day out. And we were feeling just doing one event was great, and it was a real encouragement, but actually we wanted to start doing things with the kids and with the mums. So we actually started a kids group meeting once a month and visiting all the families once a month, which again was exciting to be able to get the feel and understand that shantytown, as well as doing the work we were with the other church. And then we started a mums and tots group, we say in England, mums and babies group, and again that was really exciting. Because we just saw mums really starting to walk with Jesus. We're doing a small workshop, and then being able to share the gospel, like making bread and then talking about Jesus as the bread of life, which was a really simple, nice way of communicating the gospel, while they didn't feel we were trying to put the gospel on top of them. And then we grew both those groups, and then felt the time, basically circumstances, and we felt the right time to leave the church was, and we actually started this at the church that we now lead, Oikos, and we started by working. We didn't have enough team to carry on with the kids' work at that time, but we just felt it was right to carry on with the mums' work. So we started in our own front room up to 30 mums and their kids, which was, I still don't know how we had the grace of doing that at the time.
Yeah.
But again, we did the same, doing workshop and then sharing the gospel. We even had a retreat with the mums, which was the first time most of those had been away to outside Leeds, because these are poor mums who, a lot of the cases, single mums or technical single mums, as in the dad is around but not really around. And from that we found a few of the neighbours coming in, and little by little we managed to start a church through that work.
So cool.
So, of course, when you move anywhere to a new place, you have expectations and assumptions of what it's going to be like, but I'm sure that not all of those were right. So what were some of the assumptions that you guys had which you had to change?
I think for me, timekeeping was one. I mean, the Western, I always remember when I went to Eastern Europe when I was younger, when they said, Westerners have watches, but people in Eastern Europe have time. And I think it's very much the same here in South America. But I thought we could change people in terms of timekeeping. Like, we still start our church service at 10:30, but last Sunday when Alex and Hannah were there, they were the only people that were actually at the church service. There were 2 people that were not at our early prayer meeting, and people started to arrive 20, 30, 40 minutes after we started. Also, when we have meetings here, you expect people to be late, and so you can change the culture. But I think we were frustrated, and even though we'd learned and taken books with us for meetings, because we arrived there early and on time, so we don't want to be rude. But I think certainly one of them is timekeeping. I think also for me another assumption that I've made is that we can change people because we know the gospel, and we know we've got a lot of education, we've grown up, but actually here people, when they really get hold of it, they have a much more truer form of what Christianity is. I think in the West we can get so to the point that it's all about head knowledge, and I think I fell into that as well. Had a lot of learning and a lot of new ideas that I'd had in my head before we moved out, then actually having to adapt those to the culture. For example, talking about praying for healing, for example, I got an American model of how to pray for healing, but actually here you have to spend time talking to the person, which you don't necessarily have to do in an American context, in a Western context, because people. But I think we had to talk through more counselling it, because it's a much more relational culture.
Yeah. So Anna, talk a bit more about some of the things that you've adjusted, maybe challenges here that you've had to overcome, or just ways of ministering that you've realised that you've adapted without compromising the gospel, but you've adapted the forms and expressions of that, or
I think one of the important things about being a missionary, wherever your context is to spend the time observing first. And I think a lot of the initial years that we were here, or the first couple of years, we're learning the language, but we're also observing the culture before we go in and try and do something else. And I think often as missionaries we think it's about our role to go and take something, and really it's not. I mean, we have gifts that God can use in a particular culture, but it's joining with what God is already doing, and it's learning as well from the culture and seeing, okay, where can what I've got and what I bring, my culture, enhance and help their culture and bring them closer to God, and where can I help draw out the stuff that God is already doing? Where can I, as an outsider, help identify and say to them, okay, do you know what? God is working in the midst of this situation, or this is biblical. Do you know that this is biblical? Actually, this part of your culture isn't so biblical. So when we work with the Shabibo people, for example, if we look at childcare, so I've learned a lot from the Shabibo women in terms of just their gentleness of care, their inclusion of children. There's not the same stages of kind of teenage rebellion, because it's very much more about children from the time that they can get involved with life. So they get involved with the cooking to the point that they can, but there's not a pressure of, oh, you've got to do your chores, or oh, you've got to do certain things. They want to get involved. They see the adults doing it and they want to do it, and that kind of continues through to the teenage years, them getting more involved.
Much more healthy.
It's very much an imitation culture, but at the same time they're not very directive. So at the same time they won't necessarily call out problems or put limits. So there's kind of a balance of things that I've been able to learn, a kind of a gentleness towards my children, a kind of letting things go a bit more, not trying to control everything, that I've learned a lot from them. And then equally we've been able to help set boundaries with them, or say to them, okay, well, rather than just letting your child sleep whenever you want and then feel like your life is controlled by their sleep routine, there are certain things that you could do to help to encourage them to not sleep at a certain time or go to sleep at a certain time. And we talk to them about routines, and they see that in our life too. So there's kind of a complementary thing that goes on, and that happens with faith too, and the different aspects that they may be good at in their faith, and other aspects that we we may be stronger in.
And I think another good example of that is planning and being spontaneous as well. That we're obviously called to balance between being planned and organised as well as being spontaneous. And naturally, the Peruvian culture, and especially in the jungle, is very spontaneous, while naturally the Western culture is much more planned and ahead. And so that obviously applies in the gospel in terms of people don't have money to plan, but then there's the Bible verse of the daily bread. So there's that. I think for us it's been helped us in our faith walk in terms of God will provide, because the Peruvians know that's going to be a provision, but sometimes there's a presumption rather than a faith, as in, oh, God will provide, but actually God has not said that. So we've been able to help to balance between the presumption and faith, what is faith and what is presumption. And at the same time for ourselves, it's been like, we don't have to plan everything, we don't have to get so mechanical that if something's not planned, the whole world's going to erupt in turmoil. So I think that's been another helpful lesson for us as well in that sense.
Okay, so this is all very well and good in the Peruvian context, but most people aren't called to Peru or even a similar...
Why not? We need you.
So, although I'm not sure you'd want everybody coming here.
Well,
Anyway.
that's probably not.
So, if you went back to the West, what would you do, or how can you encourage the rest of us, most of whom are in the West? What can we learn from these examples in our contexts?
Yeah, I think if I was going to move back, and we have at times thought, maybe in times of discouragement, okay, we want to go back to England where we come from, or maybe do something elsewhere. And so those thoughts do go through my head. What would we do? What would mission look like? What would a missionary lifestyle look like if we went somewhere else or went back? And I think it would be about finding some like-minded people to pray with and to be in community with. Not too many, because you don't want it to become just about your friendships with them, but and people who also want to reach other people. Regularly pray with them. Spend some time just observing, praying into what the next moves are, and then seeing who are the people who are open to spiritual things, who is God always already working with, who can we reach out to. It might look like getting a job, which would put me in contact with people who are non-Christians.
Yeah,
So,
or joining a sports club.
yeah, in Mark's case, he might join a running club or a rugby club,
Yeah.
and find opportunities to meet with people who are not Christians and build relationships with them, and then find opportunities to bring God into conversations in a natural way, especially when they're in times of crisis or times of problems. I think showing people love in times of crisis as well, saying to people, I'm praying for you, or is there something specific that I can pray for you for, and if they say no thank you, that's fine too, but seeing who are the people who are open to that and who want to learn more, because they're the people who you're discipling. Like if we're talking about making disciples, it's a process of disciple means a learner. So who are the people who want to learn from us? And they don't have to be believers. Even the disciples of Jesus, it says at the end of Matthew that even after Jesus was risen from the dead and some doubted, so even some of the disciples were not even real believers in who Jesus was as the Son of God. And so I think it's who are those people who want to learn from us, who are people who we can intentionally disciple and include in our lives, have over to our house, invite people over for meals, or meet with them in the park, or whatever works at your stage of life. If your kids are young, it might be going to the park. If you're an empty nester, it might be looking for a particular club to go and join, or a hobby to be part of. But ways that we can connect with other people and just live lives alongside them, but show them a difference.
Because I think often we come with inbuilt expectations of what success is going to look like, and it sounds to me, well, I know this, but I'd like you to talk a bit about, for you've been very much focused on making disciples, which takes a lot of time. So just talk about how you kind of assess, are we winning, are we
Can I quickly respond to the last question before we do that? Sorry. Because two things that Anna was talking about, I think, are summed up easily in intentionality and creativity. And I think we have had to be intentional in the way we've done discipleship. We've had to be intentional inviting people for meals, but we've also had to be creative. For example, in the shanty town, we wanted to have times of prayer, we wanted to have times of eating together, but mainly the main disciples, the main people that were showing interest in Jesus were kids. And so we couldn't go to someone's house, and the houses are very small because they're shacks basically. So we had to find a way of doing that which was intentional and creative. So we made what's called Casa de Paz, the House of Peace, which is a homework help club, so we could eat together with the kids and also be on one-to-one level with them in a formal setting where the parents were very happy. So I think in a Western culture as well, it's that we need to be intentional about how do we do it. Because, for example, I remember going to an Argentinian's house in Spain, and the way they did meals was very different from the way we did meals. And so going to a different culture, different place, even within your own country, is how do you do eat together, how do you do praying in the right culture? And sometimes we have to be outside of our norms and be creative.
Talk a bit about what success looks like for you guys.
So we were saying we're still kind of exploring what that is a little bit, but I think it's to do with fruit. And I think the Bible talks a lot about where we produce fruit, and fruit is not something that's this side of heaven continually on the tree. It's something that comes in seasons, and it's something that takes time to grow. We've had peach trees in our garden, and you're amazed at how easy it is to go to the shop and get a peach. Like, it just happens automatically. But if you want to grow a peach, it takes 2 or 3 years for the tree to grow to maturity, and then even when the flowers start budding, it takes 9 months for a peach to fully mature on the tree. And I think that's often what discipleship is like for us as well. So now we've been here for 12 years, we're able to look back and see, okay, the difference that our day in, day out discipleship, which at times has felt like, oh, we do making a difference. We're seeing marriages that are now strong and stable, or we're seeing people who would have gone away from the Lord, who us being strong, and they're now discipling other people and staying with them. Those parents who've got a different outlook on what it looks like to budget for their family or to look after their children, and all those things are generationally transforming.
And also, you've raised up church leaders, and I mean, there's a whole range, isn't there?
Absolutely. We have Rafa and Cider, who lead our ministry in the jungle. They came here as two individuals who were thinking about dating, because the Shabiba culture is different in the way they do dating. It's half arranged, half not. And they came as nervous, tentative, quite slow at learning because their education obviously is at a lower level. They were with us for 6 years, and it took a long time, and at times we thought, why are we investing in them when other people are growing quicker? But actually they've been faithful, and we've seen amazing fruit, and now they've moved out to the jungle, and we go to their church services, and it feels like we're in the jungle, and maybe the people there are still very young Christians or not yet Christians, and they don't understand the same culture of discipleship and love and worship and giving that we understand here in Lima. But Rafa and Cider are completely convinced that's the right way to do it, and you can see the way that he leads worship in a way that honours God, and people are starting to encounter that, to the point of one of the mothers came to the church and said to Anna, this is the first church I've been to in 40 years where I felt God loves me.
Wow.
And that may have taken 6 years, 7 years, but actually it's making a difference with people who've not felt God's love ever.
Yeah.
So it's not just been about salvations or about people coming to church. You take a much more long-term view, more holistic view of what discipleship looks like.
I don't see that. I mean, there are obviously arguments, but I mean, Jesus tells us to go and make disciples. He doesn't tell us to go and plant churches, and he doesn't tell us to go and make converts. And so I think it is a long-range process, and I'm not saying that a prayer for conversion is not important. That can be an important step on somebody's road with Jesus, and equally I believe in the value and God's desire that there are churches and communities. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is I see Jesus saying your job is to go and make disciples. So that is what I feel my responsibility is. It's not how many people are in my church or how many churches I plant. It's, am I intentionally discipling others? Who are the people in my life right now who want to learn from me? And how can I intentionally invest in their lives in a holistic way, but also continually pointing them back to God?
And as you do that, the natural outflow will be salvations, and will be churches planted,
Absolutely.
and will be kingdom businesses, and will be lives transformed. And
I think that I thought that our ministry would be, I don't know, a sense of explosion very quickly. Like the Holy Spirit would come as on Pentecost, and there would be 2,000 people added to the church in one day, and kind of that would go off. And I think I have to continually remind myself about the importance of multiplication.
Yeah.
And even if I disciple one person to faith this year and continually disciple them, and then they do one person next year, like it only takes, I think, 30 years or so, or 60 years for 1 million people to be reached. Like it's the multiplication effect is incredibly powerful, and so we need to not
Dismiss that.
dismiss that.
And I think I want to encourage people that are watching this video as well, because I'm sure that you're thinking how amazing we are, which we're not. Well, we are, because God loves us. But actually, we're talking about the highlights here, but actually the day in, day out is hard at times. I mean, Alex and Hannah are a testimony that we've had some really, really hard times in our ministry. And there's days where we're very frustrated, it's very hard work. But actually, when we do videos like this, it shows amazing how God has worked through us. And sorry, this fly's attacking us. Part of overseas missionary. No, missionary work. But actually, the day in, day out, even though it can be horrible at times, it can be a trudge at times. Actually, when you take time, like doing videos like this, like speaking to churches, you realise how much God is doing in between those trudges, and how God is always faithful, even when we don't feel like it.
It's good.
Anything you want to say?
No, it's encouraging, it's exciting, and it's good having, walk with you and just seeing the fruit, but over the long term it's not been quick. As you say, I like the analogy of the peach on the tree, and it just takes time.
Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for watching. A couple of things I want to say as we wrap up. Firstly, in terms of homework and your next step, what we'd encourage you to do is just to take some time to go back to the Lord and say, Lord, who have you called me to? So some of you won't know who that is, but you need to pursue him. Who in this season are we particularly called to be reaching? And as you have clarity on that, if you know already, I think listening to what these guys are saying, which is, Lord, what's the specific next step so that we can be in the business of making disciples who make disciples? So I think set your expectations around that multiplication process. And obviously it's a joy when we get to baptize people, when we see salvation. We want that. But the big goal ultimately is we're making disciples who make disciples. So what's your specific next step for the next period of time, whether it's next year or a couple of years, whatever, so that you are moving, you and your household are moving more intentionally in that direction, being aware of the context where you are, so the way it's going to look has to work for the people whom you're called to reach. And you do it with that flavour in mind. It will look different to a previous place you've lived or to what your friend does in another context. So do it in a way that works for your people. So that's the first thing. So that's your homework. Secondly, because they won't do this, we just want to commend to you Mark and Anna and their family. We'll put a link in here for more info if you want to find out more about them. We personally give financially to support them. And you'll see in the other video we did with them where they talk about living by faith and how they've never really had a month where the money's coming in advance. So we would love you if you would consider prayerfully investing in them personally or in the ministry that they're doing. Mark talked about Casa de Paz, for instance, the ministry in the shantytown to very, very poor children. So there's lots of ways you could do that. So we'd love it if you would prayerfully consider doing that, just as part of blessing what the Lord is doing around his world. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank
God
you.
bless
Amazing.
you.
Thank you for watching and still watching now.
Yes, and wherever you watch this, please hop over to dandelionresourcing.com, and that's where you can add comments and ask questions and find out more. So thanks very much.